she went off into the deep end that I kind of wish I hadn't bought them at this point. There were thousands of people in line at my library. It took forever. My enjoyment of the series has gone down, and I almost rated this a 5-star. Kind of like what you would imagine if you tried really hard to make things work with someone that you dated in high school. Hello, my name is Emily Crow from The Cozy Crow, and welcome to my YouTube channel. We have a new location today, talking about everything that I read in the month of April. Yes, we have finally finished. Well, there are some other touches we want to do on this bookshelf, but the bookshelf is for the most part finished. It is usable and I have filled it up. I do have a vlog coming where I walk you through kind of my process of organizing my bookshelf, and I'm sure there is more to be done. I definitely want to have like a little lamp here, just something fun, maybe with some like vintage elements. I don't know, because we live in an older house, so that would be really cool. I'm just still trying to think about what I want to do. I might do like a contact paper thing in this little cubby, but here are all the physical books that I have to represent what I read in the month of April. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I'm so excited to talk to you about all the books that I read. I actually got through 20 reads, which is wild. Let's first jump into all of my statistics for the month. I have my little paper. I have compiled some statistics using partially Storygraph, which is where I like to log my reading. I definitely recommend it. It is a Black woman-owned business. Love to support. But there's a couple other statistics that I've compiled myself, and if there's anything else that you want to know about my reading statistic wise, then just let me know down below and I can let you know. So like I said, I had 20 reads in the month. I didn't have any 5-star reads, but I do use Storygraph's quarter-star system, and so I had lots of like 4.5 and even 4.75-star reads, just no 5-star reads that were perfect, amazing, no notes about them kind of thing. I had a 2-star read, which is one of my lowest ratings for a book that I actually completed. Maybe I hate read it, not sure. My overall star rating was 4.08, so that's actually pretty good. I did in fact have lots of really good reads for the month. I just didn't get a 5-star. When we look at those 20 reads, I read 17 audiobooks. That's the bulk of my reading is through audio. I read 1 ebook, and I read 2 physical books. When we look at the genres that I read, I am all over the place this month. I read 9 fantasies, 5 romances, 2 dystopian novels, and then I read 1 each of nonfiction, historical fiction, general or lit fic, and sci-fi. I had a good little spread of some other genres, but of course you see the majority of my reads are romance and fantasy. That's where I do a lot of my reading. The shortest book that I read this month was a short story that was included in a novel. So this was The Game by Rebecca Thorne. It's included at the end of her second book in the Teas and Tomes series. And this was only 30 pages long. And then the longest read that I had this month was Heat of the Everflame. Now there's multiple versions because there's the indie version and the traditionally published book. But what I saw on Storygraph was it was 761 pages. That was a very long book. So I'm not sure which edition that is 761 pages. Either way, it for sure was the longest book I read by a long ways this month. I also really like to look at when these books were published that I read, just so I can see how current my reading is, if I'm reading things that just recently came out versus things that I wanted to read over the past couple of years as I've gone back into reading versus going back through some backlist things and just kind of seeing how current and how relevant my reading tastes are. So I read 7 books published this year in 2025, which is a lot. That is a lot. I am very surprised that I got through so many new releases. I read 5 books published in 2024, 5 books published in the early 2020s, 1 book published in the 2010s, 1 book published in the 2000s, and 1 book, my oldest book, was published in 1945. It is up here, hard to see, but that was Animal Farm by George Orwell. I'm trying to read more classics, and that's another goal that I want to talk about. Some of my yearly goals that I am addressing in these videos as well. I want to read more classics intentionally. I want to read more books written by people of color. And I want to get books off of my physical TBR. I have a specific list of 25 books I want to read this year in 2025. So talking about those goals, I read one classic, I already mentioned it, Animal Farm by George Orwell, and I've never actually read it because in high school I took an international studies English language class, and so I read a lot more diverse reads when I was taking those classes rather than like traditional American and British literature. So that's part of the reason why I want to go back and read all these classics that I feel like I missed out on in high school. I read 3 books by people of color, which is great. I'm really trying to diversify my reading and it's taking some effort. I don't have a specific net goal in mind, but I want to make sure that every month I am selecting authors of color. And then I got 1 book off of my 25 in 2025 TBR, which brings my total up to 9 out of 25. So I am ahead of schedule. I am doing pretty good, and I am really happy with how that looks. If you look at all of these books, I purchased some of these books this month, but overall, looking at the books that I got off my physical TBR, I was able to get 12 books off my physical TBR. I am still a net positive for books I purchased versus books I got off my physical TBR, but this is a year-long goal of mine, and some months are gonna be really heavy for the reads that I'm really excited about and that I'm really looking forward to. I'm trying to keep track of new releases that I have my eyes on so that I know when they're coming. That also means that I have like actual scheduled trips to the bookstore, and when you go to the bookstore, you buy books. I'm still working on decreasing my overall physical TBR shelves, but it is a work in progress for the year. I think that's all of our statistics, so let's jump into all my reads, going one by one. Why is it not showing me? Oh no. What? I love that the very first book review I pull up to talk to you about, I didn't even do. I swear I thought that I had. So I had to go back through and kind of think about what I wanted to say. But the first book that I finished in April was The Kiss Countdown by Etta Easton. This is a romance novel by a person of color that talks about a girl who's recently lost her job over kind of a silly misunderstanding, but she is an event planner type of character and an astronaut. And as their lives collide and they end up living together in the same house, kind of roommate situation, they get to know each other, they end up fake dating. And there's some interesting dynamics with both of their families and this kind of relationship, and also the struggle of trying to see how their very different lifestyles fit together, especially with him going on a mission really soon and all the time that it takes to prep for that. I rated this a 4-star. I found that in general, the characters had some pretty good depth and it was pretty interesting to read about them and kind of get to know them. I liked the chemistry, though nothing super stood out to me in a way that I was like, oh, this is like unique. This is a very different story. This is really resonating with me. Again, I've read a ton of romance, so this was a really solid read, but nothing that was exceptional, I guess, in my opinion. I really did not like the third act conflict though of this story, even though in general, I liked the dynamics between these characters and kind of how the relationship formed. The third act conflict felt like lots of assumptions, lots of being overly emotional or dramatic, and I don't know, I just wasn't a fan. And then when the third act conflict resolved, it also felt very dramatic and over the top, and like it kind of didn't fit the characters. So I don't know, the third act conflict was just a very squeaky wheel for me, not my favorite, hence why this is just a 4-star, solid read. I would definitely read more from this author, but not a favorite by any means. The next book that I have to share with you is one I was really anticipating. This is When the Earth Was Green by Riley Black, and I was able to go to their first author event in Salt Lake City, and I got my book signed, and they drew a little dinosaur, which is so cute. So that was a really awesome event that Under the Umbrella Bookstore hosted, and I'm really grateful that I got to go to that. It was a really small, nice, intimate event. Got to ask lots of really cool questions from Riley, and it was such a pleasure to see her. I really enjoyed this book. I stumbled on The Last Days of the Dinosaurs, was it last year? And one of my favorite books. Like, I think it was in my top 10. I loved it. This book is a narrative nonfiction style where the prose just really brings you into the story, makes you feel like you were there in prehistoric times. It's really educational and really approachable from like a science standpoint. Definitely could be considered pop science if you're into that kind of thing. So even without a background in dinosaurs, or in this case, prehistoric plants, I think that you would really enjoy the way this is written and what you learn from it. I listened to this audiobook. I rated this a 4.5 star. Again, I loved Riley's prose and I love the way that she told the story and really made it colorful and come to life in a way that made it obvious how much research they did and how invested they are in these topics. And what's really cool is even in paleontology and paleobiology, that there are still discoveries made to help us learn things like what color certain dinosaurs were and things like that. And even though a lot of what's written in here is based on what we know now or what we suspect now, Riley also is very humble and acknowledges that this could change based on what research shows us, but this is their best guess. And also in the back, there's an appendix why this is their best guess on why they portrayed things the way that they did, what message they used to guide the way they wrote this, because that's just really, really cool. I just didn't find plants quite as fascinating as dinosaurs, but I still really enjoyed this book and definitely recommend. The next book that I read is one I want to add to my bookshelf, but I'm waiting until there's a paperback version. And this is The Women by Kristin Hannah. And I had been waiting for my library hold for probably like 7 or 8 months at that point. There were thousands of people in line at my library. It took forever. And so when it finally showed up, I needed to grab that loan. This book was really heart-wrenching. I used to work for the VA as a nurse, and my heart has a special place for the veterans and what they went through. And we saw a lot of veterans who served in the Vietnam War. And even though nowadays I feel like we forget how hated that population was when they came back from the war, there was a lot of animosity towards the war efforts in general towards the end. And so when these soldiers came home, there was a lot of animosity towards them, even though they were trying to serve their country and answer the call of duty. There's a lot to be said about that. The first part of this book involves a young woman who decides to enlist as an army nurse and go out to Vietnam and help in that way because she feels like that's how her father's going to be proud of her, because he has always talked about the military men in their history. This happens really quick in the book that she gets to Vietnam. So the first half of the book is her experience there. It's definitely very graphic. There's definitely a lot of tension, but there's also some hope and fun moments as well, kind of what you would expect from a wartime setting. The second half of the book is when she returned home, all the struggles that she faced personally with PTSD and her relationships with those around her, but also the impact of the war in general on the people around her and their feelings towards her as a result of that. I did feel like the second half of this book was a little bit predictable, but overall, the entire book just pulled me in and I could not put it down, and it was really emotionally fraught and I was really invested in hearing about what would happen. But I definitely enjoyed the first half more than the second half. This was actually my first Kristin Hannah book, and it definitely won't be my last, but I need a break before I read something that is as emotional. My next read was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and this is part of the Regency Fairy Tales trilogy. There are a couple other books and I'm really excited to continue on in this series. I rated this a 4.5 star. I really enjoyed it. It's set in a Regency era with some Fae elements thrown in, not totally engrossed within the story, but enough in the periphery that the main character is affected by the Fae. She had half her soul taken by a fairy when she was younger, and so that affects her behavior and the way she sees the world and interacts with others. But for the most part, people are unaware of the effects of the fairy, but as you continue on in the story, you learn more about the impact of the fairy, and you even uncover this plot that's going on with the fairy and how they're impacting the real world. So it's really cool to hear about. I love the historical aspects of the Regency era, but also looking at the laborers in this time period too, so you get multiple perspectives, which is really cool. I really enjoyed this romance between these two characters. It is Dora, who had half her soul taken away, and the Lord Sorcier, Elias, who fall in love. It was really cool to just see their dynamic and how he appreciated her for who she was and didn't feel the need to fix her, even though she stood out from everyone in what was commonly considered a negative light. So I really like their relationship and how things kind of blossomed. I really wish there was more depth to their relationship, that we could have seen more growth in that. But there was that secondary plot of like that mystery of the Fae being uncovered. And so I guess I kind of understand at this length why we didn't get more of the romance, but I would have loved more of the romance. I do feel like the author did a really good job at tying all the threads of the story together and being really intentional with how things were alluded to earlier on in the story. And it just felt very satisfying to reach the ending of this book and feel like all the loose ends were tied up. So I really did appreciate that. I think the second and third books are about different couples within this world. So again, I'm excited to dive in. In the back of this book, there is a short story called The Lord Sorcier, where you hear the background of Elias and his best friend as they are in war against the French. They're in trenches basically, and you get to see the Lord Sorcier go from just a common soldier to then become the Lord Sorcier and have this prowess and this respect from the people at large. You get to see that growth. I rated this a 4-star. I don't feel like this short story is necessary for the series or even really necessary for the characters and to kind of see where they came from, but it was really fun and I did enjoy reading it. This next book that I read, I already have a vlog about. This is Once Upon a December by Amy E. Reichert, and this was part of Woolbury Fiber Co.'s December Society of Books box. And so you can definitely watch my vlog to learn more about this, but I rated this a 3.75 star. I thought it was a really cute, cheesy romance with some magical realism type of vibes in it. Jack lives in a magical Danish market that kind of travels around the world and opens up in Christmas markets. Again, around the world, different time frames. They go to multiple Christmas markets a year, kind of time resets for them every December. It's a very interesting time system. And Astra lives in Milwaukee and their paths are continually crossing. He remembers her from prior visits, but she does not remember him. But there may be inklings that she will remember him. So you get to see their relationship grow. Again, it's very cheesy, very Hallmarky vibes in the relationship. I thoroughly enjoyed my process of reading this and I loved the magical realism element. It was strong enough that I felt like it made sense for the story and the plot. I also really like learning about Danish Christmas traditions and feeling really engrossed in that kind of environment. If you're looking for a book that has really good holiday vibes, I would definitely recommend this one. Now, as far as the romance goes, I loved seeing their interactions both in the past and present and how they got to know each other. I do feel like the conflict in this book fell a little short on Jack's end. I wish we could have seen more internal tension with him. He needed more character depth. I also found that there's a large section of this book that we didn't see the romance in, that there was a large section of time where they weren't interacting with one another since he was only around in December. And I did not enjoy reading about her life as much outside of that Christmas market and her relationship with Jack. I just didn't care about her going to Florida to visit her family or her dealing with her ex or doing stuff with her dog. I just wasn't as invested as I was in the relationship, hence why it's a 3.75, but definitely one I would recommend. The next book that I read, I listened to on audio because I was considering buying it. It just came out in paperback and it has really pretty sprayed edges. And I'm glad I got it from the library first because I don't think I want to purchase this book. This is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faizal, I think is how it's pronounced. Another author of color. So I rated this book a 3-star. In general, there wasn't anything like superbly wrong with it, but I feel like there wasn't anything that was superbly right either. There were just a lot of things that I feel like didn't quite work for me. First of all, I had no idea setting-wise where we were. I feel like I didn't get a good visual in my mind of the locations we were at or when we were changing locations, and it often made it hard to kind of ground myself in the story and understand where we were, where the characters were, especially as we were switching perspectives quite frequently. The perspectives were a little bit short for me, so that made it hard to kind of get grounded in a perspective and know what was going on and then go to the next perspective. I felt constantly uprooted and also kind of floating in the stories, not quite sure where we were at, just seeing the characters and not seeing the locations at all, if that kind of makes sense. This is a heist style story where the main character runs a tea shop that at night sells blood to vampires, and it's a little bit under the table, but someone is buying the location, so her lease is going away and she's not going to be able to have this business anymore. So she's trying to steal something to then use as blackmail so that she can still have her business, kind of thing. The motives are a little bit fuzzy, but that's kind of the idea. So they're going on this heist, and there's secrets, there's betrayal, there's definitely twists and turns going on. So it kept me interested in the story to see what happened next. Though some of those betrayals were definitely predictable. I really didn't like the romances in this story. It felt like everyone was pairing off. None of the romances were very deep or intentional. It just felt like they were just there, and I was just not on board for any of them. The prose of this story is very poetic, and so there were definitely some lines that really caught me and were really intriguing, but I feel like it just wasn't the right kind of story for me. I wanted more from the story itself, not necessarily from the writing. And I feel like those are two different skills, being able to tell a story or being able to just write in words. And I feel like I didn't quite get the story behind this book. The next book that I read was Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. And this book I have signed as well, because I went to an event in Salt Lake, and honestly, it was like the worst event I've ever been to, but it wasn't the event's fault. Traffic was horrible, parking was stressful, I was late, I didn't get a book because they were missing a shipment of books, and because I was one of the last in, I didn't get a book, and it was just like a really stressful time. Not as enjoyable as I had hoped, but I was really glad I still got to see her, and they ended up sending me a book that was signed by her once they got that box in, like the very next day. And so I got my book within like a week or so, which I'm really grateful for. So this book is part of the When in Rome series that I've loved by her. I've tried reading her other books. I don't really enjoy her older style as much, and I don't enjoy the cheat sheet as much either. While I didn't connect with Emily in this book as much as I did with Annie in the second book, Practice Makes Perfect, I still really understood her character, and I felt like she was really well written, especially in her decisions, even if I didn't agree with them, and she did a lot of self-sabotaging. I also loved Jack, who was like her nemesis, but not in like a really intense way that felt unrealistic. Like it felt like a realistic nemesis type of situation in the real world. And so I loved seeing them come together and get to know each other and grow closer to each other. I found him incredibly mature emotionally, and so I had a lot of joy in reading about him. I wish that there was a little bit more in the epilogue, a little bit more of a wrap up to the story. I just wanted a little bit more at the end, but I really love this book. I rated it a 4.5 star. The next book that I read, I did as a buddy read with my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, and this is Book of 1,000 Days by Shannon Hale. And this is a middle grade novel. I had not read it before. I rated this a 4.5 star because I feel like if I was the right audience, that's what I would rate this book. Though my personal enjoyment was probably a little less than that, just because I'm not the right demographic right now for reading a book like that. But it's for sure a book I could see myself recommending to my daughter when she is old enough to enjoy a book of this size. You follow a princess and her maid who are shut up in a tower and forced to live there for 7 years because the princess does not want to marry the scary man that the king wants her to marry. And you learn some things about who this man is. You get to see him in the story and why the princess was so scared of him. But this book is written in a series of journal entries as the maid is like counting her days, helping out the princess. You see their experience in here, and you see their experience out of the tower as well, as the world has changed over the past few years, and they've changed through their experiences as they are trying to find a new place in the world and trying to be safe and also help with the safety of the rest of the kingdom kind of idea. If this is inspired by a folktale or a fairy tale of some sort, I'll write it up above. I can't quite remember, but I really loved Dashti's perspective, and she was just such a calm presence and determined as well. Like her characterization was one you could totally root for, and I loved seeing her love story happen through the walls of the tower and then moving on into the world. Like it was just really sweet and tender, which I feel like is perfect for a middle grade novel. I did feel like the conclusion of the book was a little bit too perfect of a wrap up. Like everything worked out just perfectly, And so it wasn't as satisfying because I feel like more nuance I would have enjoyed more, but overall, this is a really good book, and yeah, one I would definitely recommend for a middle grade audience. The next book that I read is another one I've been waiting for a while. This is The Favorites by Layne Fargo. This is a historical fiction about a pair of ice dancers who start out in their teenage years really starting to make it big, starting to go to big competitions, getting training, and then becoming really famous in the world of ice dancing. And you kind of see their lives ebb and flow, the struggles they go through, both personally, in their relationship, things like that. And you see them continually come back together. If you haven't heard of the story, it's kind of a toxic relationship. They're not necessarily that great for each other, but they won't quit each other, kind of thing. Kind of like what you would imagine if you tried really hard to make things work with someone that you dated in high school. But there's a lot of drama in here. I really loved learning about the ice dancing aspect because I wasn't super familiar with it. It just was really engrossing. I do enjoy reading some like messy, like historical fiction type of stories. And this has definitely been compared to Taylor Jenkins Reid. Though I feel like I like Taylor Jenkins Reid more because of the nuance and the depth of all the characters and really feeling like I understood what was going on. This book, I feel like it was a lot of drama, a lot of mess, but I feel like I couldn't quite reconcile the cat, especially in her perspective versus Cat in everyone else's perspective. I didn't quite understand that. I couldn't reconcile those differences. And maybe if the story was written from more of her perspective in the narrative, then I could have seen what shaped her character a little bit more. But this story is written in kind of like a real time as it's happening. And then also you get some interviews as people are looking back on what was happening during this time. But Kat didn't participate in these interviews, and neither did Heath. And so, yeah, I feel like that's where the maybe discrepancy was for me. I wish I could have heard more perspective on like them looking in the past on what was happening. Again, there was a lot of drama and almost too much drama where it didn't feel very realistic. Things just kept happening. I don't know. I really enjoyed this book and I couldn't put it down. I really had a lot of fun with it, but definitely not my favorite historical fiction. The next book that I read was my only ebook, and I really enjoyed this. This was The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen, and this was buy one, get one 50% off at Barnes & Noble, and so I bought the first book, started reading it to make sure I liked it, and I liked it enough that I just bought the rest of the series, which is great because the fifth book just came out. So I was able to get some good deals, which I'm excited about. These covers are really fun, got some really fun like foil type parts of it. And this is a really easy to recommend fantasy series I really had a lot of fun with. I rated this a 4.5 star. Lara has been raised as a potential spy and assassin to infiltrate the Bridge Kingdom. One of the daughters of this rival king is promised to marry into the Bridge Kingdom as part of a treaty, and so the rival king trains like a dozen of his daughters up to become assassin spy. Lara is the one who ends up going, and you see the relationship grow and change as she's really distrustful of him from what her father has told her, but she's seeing different things. He, the prince, is also very distrustful of her because she's an outsider, and if someone were to figure out the secrets of this Bridge Kingdom, then they could infiltrate and take it over and then have all access to these channels of trade, which is really the Bridge Kingdom's only way for commerce. While they definitely dictate the trade, and that's why others want to infiltrate, that's their only source of income, and they live in a really dangerous place made up of tons of islands that are connected by a bridge. I wonder if there's a picture in here because it was a really interesting concept, and I loved, oh, here we go. And I love the political aspect of this story. So that's the Bridge Kingdom right there, in between these two continents. It's all connected by a bridge. There's some secrets about how to access these islands, how to access the bridge for this commerce. And so that's really Lara's main goal in infiltrating the Bridge Kingdom. But you see the relationship grow. I loved seeing the relationship develop. It felt very natural and understandable. They're kind of enemies to lovers arc, and it was very much a slow burn. I would have loved a little bit more growth from Aaron in his characterization, in his feelings for Lara, especially because you do see his perspective a lot in this book. It has dual POV. I also feel like the ending conflict of like where this book ends was very predictable. I saw it coming from a mile away, and it was kind of a slow crawl to that end conclusion that was a little bit tiring to like read about. I just wanted to get to the end so that the rest of the characters could see what was going to happen. This series is written in groups of duologies. So the second book in this series is going to conclude Aaron and Lara's story. It ended really intensely, really emotionally, definitely some, death, destruction, chaos, etc. And so I'm waiting to start the second book until I feel ready for that, but I'm really excited to continue on in the series. As far as the fantasy goes, the romance is a strong plot point, but it's not super like romance heavy. It's a very slow burn romance. I like the politics, and it was just very interesting world building, and it was a very approachable fantasy / romantasy, I would say. So definitely I recommend it as one that is an easy to read, but also well written type of story. The next book that I read was again one I've seen around, and I was hoping I would love to add to my bookshelf, and that's just not the case. And this is Not in My Book by Katie Holt, who is another author of color. And I rated this a 3-star. There were things I really liked and things I really didn't like. And so I would definitely read more from this author. This was her debut. I know some people have loved this as a romance. I am not totally behind the enemies to lovers trope, especially in romance. I feel like in this book, it was a little bit too heavy. Like I didn't understand why these characters hated each other so much. They were both in an MFA of writing program, and they were in the same workshop type of class. So they were butting heads a ton, but to the point where it was really unprofessional. And I was really surprised that it would have gotten that far in like a professional setting for adults. Like it just felt very high school to me. I did, however, really like these two characters and how they grew from not really liking each other to becoming friends and just seeing their friendship blossom and grow. I feel like that was a really beautiful part of this story. And I loved seeing their relationship progress into definitely having feelings for each other, but not really knowing how to address that. As a way to reconcile these two people, the teacher of this workshop makes them write a book together to kind of get over their differences and work together and have more respect for one another. And so they're working on this story, and I really like the idea of them writing a book together and having parallels to what's happening in their real life as, they are expressing themselves through the art that they are making together. But I just felt like I would have loved more nuance. I like nuance, I guess. I would have loved more nuance in the book they were writing, because it really felt like copy and paste. Instead of talking to each other, they were putting it in the book, like word for word, what they were feeling, what they were thinking. There wasn't a lot of originality in their story. I would have loved less direct parallels between the book they were writing and the life they were living in this story, if that makes sense. Yeah, it just felt like reading the same thing over and over again. And I just wanted them to communicate better instead of writing a book saying exactly what they wanted to say. And then the third act conflict, the girl just blew it way out of proportion. She like went berserk. Like she went off into the deep end. Like I did not know where she was going. It made no sense to me how emotional she got and the big decisions that she made and the trajectory she set her life on as a result of this third act conflict. It just felt really blown out of proportion. That wasn't my favorite, like her reaction to the situation, like just didn't feel normal either. It felt like too much. I would read more from this author because I did like the writing style, but I just didn't like a lot of the decisions the author made in this book, but I know some people have really loved it. In my effort to read more classics, I read Animal Farm by George Orwell this month. I've read 1984 in high school and I really enjoyed it, so I definitely want to get back to that and reread that soon. But I wanted to start with Animal Farm because I wanted a nice quick read to add to my list this month. This is a really short book. It's like 100 pages or something. This book is a satirical, allegorical commentary on Stalinist Russia in the 1940s. And it involves a farm that rebel against the farmer and then take over the farm. And you see some successes and you see some failures that they have, and you see how their little society devolves over time as a result of the situation that they put themselves in and the people that they trusted to lead them. It was straightforward. It was a pretty clear representation of what the author felt, which I appreciated. This is a classic for a reason. I rated this a 4-star because I would have loved more nuance. I would have loved a little bit more discussion or depth to this story, but for a really short novella talking about these purposes, I feel like Orwell did his job and what he set out to do, and I feel like he did it well. This honker of a book, this is Etta the Everflame by Penn, and this is the 3rd book in the series. The 4th book, Burn, is gonna come out sometime eventually. That's the final book, so we're anxiously awaiting it. My enjoyment of the series has gone down. I love the 1st book. I rated Spark of the Everflame a 5-star, but each book has been like less enjoyable for me. I think partly the length. This is a big book, but also it's very evident in this book that Diem is just not growing as a character at all. She is very stagnant. She has no character growth, no change. She's still stuck in her moral quandary from the 1st book, but now she is entrenched in a different world than she grew up in, and she is trying to figure out her role in it, and she is just not going anywhere. She's spinning her wheels, very much so. And it's getting really frustrating to read about her. I feel like there's not any growth. She is very short-sighted. She is anxious to seek revenge for some wrongs done to her family, and yet she won't actually like kill anyone who deserves it or actually act on that revenge. So it just feels like the same thing over and over again. This book, it felt like there was actually a lot happening plot-wise with where she was going, where her friends are going, what they were trying to accomplish. But again, the character growth, I feel like she needs to make a lot of growth in that last book. I rated this a 4-star because I enjoyed following the plot and seeing what was happening, learning more about the world. And oh my goodness, the side characters, even the like tertiary characters, were so good. I really loved getting to hear about so many different characters and their depth and what made them unique. I feel like the character building in this book was really, really good, except for Diem. There were some twists in this book that felt kind of obvious and like Diem should have figured it out. And I don't know if that is the way the author wrote it so that we would feel smarter than Diem or what, but she felt kind of stupid because there were so many times where I was like yelling at her about something and it took her like 100 pages to figure it out. So that again was a little bit frustrating to read. She was like, oh, blindsided by betrayal, but like everyone saw it coming. So I don't know. I'm starting to get really frustrated with her characterization and that there's no growth, no change, even though she has been plucked from her ordinary existence and life is so different now than it was like a year and a half ago for her. I feel like she should have grown by now, but she hasn't. So let's hope that the 4th book has some growth for her because I'm enjoying this world a lot. I'm enjoying these other characters a lot. She is falling short for me. And Luther's becoming less of a personality too. I guess we'll see how the last book fares when that comes out. The next book that I read is a cozy fantasy I've been looking forward to for a while. This is A Pirate's Life for Tea by Rebecca Thorne, and this is the 2nd book in the Tomes and Tea series. She is republishing these books. I don't know if all of them have been republished or if some of them are being published for the very first time now that she has this contract. I know the 1st book for sure was published independently, and I'm not sure about the rest of the series, but she's also churning out books pretty fast, so I'm impressed, and I'm really happy that she is becoming traditionally published. This book has more high stakes than the last book, and I, in general, like the story better than the 1st book because the balance of high stakes and circumstances that these characters found themselves in just had a much better flow to the plot, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like there was a ton of downtime where they were just, being cozy at their tea shop, trying to get to know their neighbors, but it felt fairly high stakes throughout, but with cozy characters who had cozy hobbies and with lots of emotional connection between the characters, so we still got that cozy vibe. I rated this a 4.5 star because I did like it more than the first book. In this specific story, Canth and Raina are roped into trying to find a pirate who has been traveling on the river and terrorizing their local government leader that they're not like a super huge fan of, but they guess they'll help him out kind of thing. And you get to see this other relationship between the pirate and one of the guards that works for this government leader. And so you see their history and their past as they come together again. So it definitely has another romance included in this story. I feel like Canth and Raina were more settled in their personal relationship. So there was less communication about like, how are we making this work? Or how are we getting to know each other? But their care for one another and their discussions felt really natural, and also like a more mature relationship would, where they are secure in each other and support one another, but also still worry for one another, but can trust each other to make the right decisions and to loop each other in when it's needed. I really liked the way that this relationship has gone, especially because in the first story, they were still kind of starting out. So there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of trying to figure out how to communicate with each other that got a little old because the same conversations kept happening. I liked this version of the relationship better, where they've settled in a little bit. I like the higher stakes of going after a pirate and then helping the pirate. So it's super fun to hear about that. I do wish we got more from Bobby and Serena's backstory and just seeing their relationship. I know it wasn't the primary relationship in the story, but I would have liked a little bit more about that. And I also feel like the conclusion of this story just kind of wrapped things up really nicely. I wish there was a little bit more substance to the dragon egg plot that was introduced at the end of the first book and is a supposed major part of this book, but we just didn't hear a lot about it, and I would have loved more about that. I do apologize, my husband is mowing the lawn right now, so hopefully you can hear me pretty okay and that editing can help with hearing stuff. I also want to talk about the short story included at the end of this book, which is called The Game, and this was my shortest read of the month. It was only 30 pages. This is a spicy story of Canth and Raina, I guess, making a game that they're not allowed to touch each other for a week leading up to their anniversary to kind of improve their physical connection with one another. So there's a lot of really good tension, and then when they finally are allowed to touch each other again, there's some spicy stuff, definitely not pertinent to the plot or anything, but it was a fun read, and I feel like Rebecca Thorne did a really good job at writing this. Rated this a 4-star. My least favorite book of the month, this will be controversial, was Fearless by Lauren Roberts. I rated this a 2-star. I just feel like the series went down a hill and there wasn't anything new adding to the later books in the series that I kind of wish I hadn't bought them at this point. What did people love about Powerless, the very first book in this series? The prose, the tension between Peyton and Kai. There was just like some beautiful writing that really hooked you in. There were some tropes and storylines that were really familiar for a YA reading audience. And so that's the first book. Compare that to this book. I feel like the author didn't take this anywhere new. Not a lot happened plot-wise, even though this is a pretty big book, like 650 pages or something. You didn't really get tension between Pei and Kai. It wasn't very believable. I wasn't very emotionally invested in their relationship. It felt a little bit emotionless, like not enough tension between them, even though they were supposedly in like not a great situation. The ending was super predictable and I could see it coming from the very beginning of the book. And even though there were some twists and turns along the way, some of them felt really unnecessary. Some things that felt a little bit maybe inappropriate even about like the twists and turns that we did see, and kind of convoluted. Like most of the book was not convoluted, and then there were a bunch of twists and turns one after the other that made the story kind of convoluted, and we only needed half of those twists and turns to move the actual plot forward, so it felt kind of unnecessary. You still get their banter and their prose in this book, but it felt really redundant. They were using the same words over and over again. There wasn't really any growth in their relationship. It was very stagnant. And again, because you could see where the story was going as a whole, you didn't feel concerned about their predicament for like 80% of the book. I really hated is it Reckless? The second book, Kit's character was really different. Like, he was kind of broken. But for most of this book, he seemed totally fine. And I really hated that incongruity with his character because it was pertinent to the overall plot of this story. When you get to the end, you will know. I feel like the storytelling was not good. It's not original. This book didn't add anything to the characters or to the banter or to any of the expectations that I had. So, I mean, yeah, like it still had that pros. There was still some tension in this relationship, but not as much as in some of the other books. Yeah, I'm just kind of bummed that I bought these. Honestly. A couple other things that I have thought of as I'm looking at my review. They mentioned Adina so many times, and another reviewer counted. They mentioned Adina's name more times than they mentioned Peyton's name. I don't know why they were so obsessed with talking about Adina in this book, because it didn't feel like they were talking about her that much in the previous book when the trauma about Adina had just happened. So I feel like they would have talked about it more in the book prior. So it was kind of weird. It felt like they were obsessed, and I just did not understand why they were obsessed about Adina. I also felt like there was tons of plot holes, things that happened that felt significant and then were just dropped. Yeah. Big letdown. The next book that I read was First Time Caller by BK Borison, and I almost rated this a 5-star, but I rated this a 4.75 star. This was actually my favorite book by BK Borison, and I know I've rated another book of theirs 5-star, but in retrospect, I would probably change it to like a 4.5 star because it wasn't super emotionally driving. But this book, I love this book. Aiden Valentine has a radio show where he has like a romance hotline, and he is just burned out about love, burned out about his job. And then he gets a call from this, I think like 12-year-old girl who's calling about her mom, and her mom stumbles in on her daughter on the phone call. She ends up joining on this phone call. She goes viral, and she's invited to be a temporary part of this show as they are trying to find Lucy some love. And so it's really cute, and you get to see their relationship kind of grow as they get really close to one another in this capacity. I love the setting and the setup of this story. I really enjoyed these characters. Though the one thing that I wish was a little different, I wish that we got more depth in Aiden's character, especially because he has some angsty parts in this book. Sometimes it was a little hard to like get behind how angsty he was, but we do get some depth to him. I just wish there was a little bit more. This relationship and this situation felt oddly realistic. Like I could totally get behind this and seeing this happening. And so it made it really easy to visualize. And I really loved hearing about these characters and getting to know them. And I just had a lot of love for them and seeing their relationship grow and progress. Seeing their interaction on the radio show were also really, really cute and like just made my heart warm. And so when they finally came to terms with how they felt about one another, that was also really, really awesome. Getting towards the end, this is Last Chance to Save the World by Beth Revis. This is a physical book that I read this month because it is a novella. It is the third novella in a comedic sci-fi series that I stumbled upon last year. I read the first 2 books back to back, loved them. I read them in December, I think. Like, I consumed them so fast. And I knew that the third book was coming out in April. So I was anxiously waiting for it to come out. And so finally got it. I rated this a 4.5 star. This is probably my least favorite of the series, but I still really enjoyed it. I found that the sci-fi or space aspect was just a bit lackluster in this story compared to the first one especially, which was my favorite of the series. It definitely felt on par with the second book, which was not as spacey, just like a gala type event somewhere. I wish there was more banter in this story since these characters are now together, working on a mission together. I wish there was more banter, but there's a lot of seriousness as they're trying to figure out how to save the planet. That kind of took away from their banter, I feel like. I wish there was a little bit more because I just love Ada's character and how she kind of gets a rise out of Ryan and how they interact and have some conflict. There was definitely some banter and it had the flavor I was looking for, but I wanted more of it. I love that in this whole series, Ada has total control of things. Like, she doesn't actually, but she has a lot more secrets under her belt and ways to make things work in her favor. And so seeing those things work out for her that she doesn't reveal to the reader right away or doesn't reveal to Ryan, who is right at this moment her partner for this situation, you just see like an Ocean's 11 or Spy type of reveal as she's like, guess what? I planned this all along, you know, pull the wool over your eyes type of a thing. And it's just really fun to see how it all comes together, and you see inklings of it earlier on in the story and you're like, oh, like she totally got us. She was able to get away with all of this stuff, or she did a lot more than she was alluding to with her planning, that she was a lot more successful in the scheming, I guess, behind the scenes. I wish there was a little bit more conclusion to the romance, because there's definitely some romantic tension between Etta and Ryan, but this book definitely ended on kind of like an ambiguous ending that leaves room for more stories about them. But I would have loved more, especially because this is kind of a slow burn in their romance, and I would have loved a little bit more to solidify their romance in the end. Kind of how I feel about this. I would definitely read more from this author. I would definitely read more from this world or the series, because I had a lot of fun with it. But the first book is by far my favorite. The last book that I finished in April was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. And I love that even though it said I would have a very long wait to read this, people were reading it really fast. And so I moved up the line really quickly for my Libby hold. This is Hamish's story, which is when he was the victor in the 50th Hunger Games. And I really like getting to know Hamish's character more, and it makes me intrigued to look at the original trilogy and Hamish's character and how his backstory shaped who he was in the original trilogy that we know and love. He's a very clever character, and so that was really cool to see how he kind of wrapped his brain around what the Capitol was doing, what other characters were doing in this story. Very different character writing than like Katniss or Peeta, or even Coriolanus in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So I really liked getting to see that and getting to see a different Hunger Games. I feel like the themes of this book are more about how the media shapes what we see in the world and what our expectations are, and also like the cruelty of the regime. It's very interesting how President Snow reacted to Hamish versus how President Snow reacted to Katniss almost 25 years later, and just how much Snow worked to break Hamish both during the Hunger Games and afterwards. No mercy. It was really interesting to think about that aspect of the story. I did feel like because this was so much closer to the original trilogy in a timeline, it almost felt like some of the Easter eggs between both Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and the original trilogy was a little bit on the nose for me. Like, there were a lot of Easter eggs and they felt really intentional, not as subtle as I would have liked. I liked the connection between the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and the original trilogy more, probably because there was more distance in time, and so they were a little bit more subtle, but there was a lot of parallels in this story with both the original trilogy and the prequel that we already have. So yeah, a little bit on the nose, not my favorite, but again, this is a YA novel. I did really enjoy it. Lots of heartbreaking things, kind of what you'd expect from a Hunger Games type of a book. Lots of trauma and trigger warnings to be aware of for sure. All right, those are the 20 stories that I read in the month of April. Lots of really good reads that I'm really happy about, and lots of reads that I was trying out and hoping for that just didn't pan out for me, and that's okay. Since I just reorganized my bookshelf, I left a couple spots for some books I want up there, but I definitely don't have enough room for all of them. So I'm going to be doing some shuffling and rearranging and finding spots for all of these books. But thank you so much for joining me for this video. And I'd love to hear down below in the comments what books you have read recently that you really loved and would recommend. And if you've read any of the books that I read in April and what your thoughts were about them. I am also on Storygraph, as I mentioned earlier, so you can find my link down below, as well as on Instagram if you want to be more connected with me and my in-the-moment reading and full book reviews on those two sites. And until next time, happy reading. Bye!